everybody, it is Wednesday the 18th of October already. Blimey, where is the month disappearing to? So it is November, December, 2 months and a week, and it will be Christmas. So 2 months and a week, and everything will be finished and over, and we'll be able to relax and actually enjoy the festivities. Today I'm going to talk about religion. I fully accept that this is not everyone's cup of tea, and I have absolutely no objection whatsoever if you just decide, well, this isn't for me, click off this and go and watch a video that you do enjoy. And I promise tomorrow it will not be about such matters, and come back and I'll have another video about something completely different. I've decided to talk about this because it's obviously the elephant in the room as far as I'm concerned, that I am a Benedictine monk, not living in my monastery, that I have a strong faith, but at the same time that I'm living in the world as part of the world, and the world around me, although it may have religious origins and a degree of religious observance, is more avowedly secular than it probably has been at any time since really the late Saxon period. I guess would be, for Europeans certainly, the last time we had such an avowedly non-Christian, or indeed secular with a of the age mentality, perhaps. I'm often asked about my faith, and particularly given my fairly liberal approach to life, and I think this is something that possibly needs to be understood. My experience of politics in Europe and in America and Australia and Canada is that people who live avowedly religious lives, have a faith that they pursue, particularly Christians, not exclusively Catholics, Christians of all denominations and persuasions. There is a strong economic liberality, for the most part, a willingness to fund social benefits, for example, healthcare, education, supported living for the elderly, supported living for those without work or those in low-paid jobs. But at the same time, there is an identifiable conservative attitude to the morals and mores of the age. Anti-abortion, anti-contraception, and anti-homosexual are three, probably the three major issues of the day. Although if we went back 30 years, it would also include unwed mothers, it would include single parenthood, it might even include, certainly when I was growing up, topics such as pornography and masturbation. So it's interesting how other elements of the moral life have overtaken those things that we might have been more concerned about in a former age. And it is a serious issue. If, as a Catholic Christian, extra ecclesiam nulla salus, outside the church there is no salvation, then I have friends of other faiths. My closest colleague and friend at work is a Muslim, for example. I have Orthodox Jewish friends. I have liberal Jewish, Reformed Jewish friends. I have Christian friends from other denominations. Are they included as part of the church? I have people of no religious faith whatsoever because they are avowedly either agnostic or indeed atheistic. And it's very difficult in a pluralistic society to hold a view which is so counter to the sense of the decency of other people that somehow they are condemned to hell because of non-membership in a human institution. And of course, therein lies the rub, that the church does not see itself as a human institution, but divinely instituted by Jesus Christ, Jesus, the anointed one of God, Jesus, the Word, Jesus, the Son of God, Jesus, one of the triune persons of the Godhead. And it's an issue that has raised its ugly head throughout history. The crusade against the Albigensians, the treatment of Jan Hus, the Protestant Reformation, the Spanish Inquisition and the persecution of Jews who had been forcibly converted to Christianity in the Iberian Peninsula. And of course, most significantly, the periodic pogroms against Jews, which culminated, although Hitler and the Nazi party were avowedly atheistic occultists, it isn't a coincidence that Nazism's birthplace was in Bavaria, the most Catholic territory in the German Empire. And it was of such consequence that at the Second Vatican Council, one of the 16 documents that was promulgated by Paul VI between 1963 and 1965 was Nostra Aetate, where it had to actually be stated that although the Jewish leaders and the multitude of the day pressured Pontius Pilate to execute Jesus, that this can't be used to incriminate all Jews throughout all the ages. And such an idea seems alien to us now, but it was such a powerful idea through the whole of the medieval world and well into the modern world, well into the 20th century, well into our own time, that the Jews were somehow responsible, the Jews of today were somehow responsible for the actions of their forebears, of some of their forebears 2,000 years ago. And the idea that we ourselves are better than them, even though many of us probably will have some element of Jewish heritage within our ethnicity, simply because if you go back enough generations, we are necessarily all related to each other. We have to be. We've all come from the same fundamental human stock. The idea of mitochondrial Eve, if you like, that science gives us, which parallels and perhaps gives scientific flesh to the notion of biblical Eve, that we are all descended from particular individuals through intermarriage and so on. I'm not wandering off. I realise I'm being very serious today, but these are serious matters. They fundamentally affect people's lives. They fundamentally affect how people relate to each other and to God, and how they can feel isolated and made to feel less than because of. This has all come to a head in some ways for two different but connected reasons. Pope Francis has been a breath of fresh air for some and a worrying harbinger of doom for others, with his perceived liberality, although in fact when one studies his actual public statements in depth, there is no fundamental change in theology, ecclesiology, moral theology, sacramental theology at all. But there is a more open and welcoming approach. One comment and an official document of his spring to mind. When asked about two homosexuals living together, his response was, "Who am I to judge?" Well, I'll come back to that later, because actually there is an element a role that we all have to play in each other's lives. But the point he was attempting to make, I think, having studied his comments around that statement, is that in a pluralist society such as we now have, where people have different understandings about the world in which they live and different precepts that they live by, then there is a degree of dealing with people where they are, not where you would like them to be, dealing with the quality of their moral outlook, even if they undertake particular activities which offend against your moral understanding of the universe. And the church has had to do this all through its history. Divorce and remarriage, children born out of wedlock, murder. Are people who commit murder unforgivable? They can't go back and not have committed the murder. And yes, there is also the element in forgiveness of a firm purpose of amendment. And can two people who are living in an objective state of sin, even if it subjectively isn't sinful for them, can they be forgiven? And the Holy Father went some way to addressing this concerning divorced and remarried couples in his apostolic exhortation following the latest synod on the family, Amoris Laetitia, which is Roman documents are always referred to by the first words of the document, and so the first words of this document, Amoris Laetitia, translated into English, is the joy of love. And for the Holy Father, his belief in the love of God is that yes, there are rules, yes, we should keep to them as best as we can, and for the rest we throw ourselves upon the mercy of a loving God. So you or I will think that Hitler, Mao, Pol Pot, Stalin, they are responsible for the pointless deaths of countless millions of people. And they, by our reckoning, deserve to be in hell. By God's reckoning, he may have forgiven them. And I can't even begin to understand how that could be in a emotional way. But in a theoretical way, there is a traditional saying about the wisdom of God, that God's foolishness is wiser than the greatest human wisdom. And I cannot, and this I think is where the Holy Father was saying, who am I to judge? I can judge my life because I understand what I believe, and I understand how I live, and I understand how I make decisions. I'm not always as free to make the decisions that I make as I think I am, perhaps, and I have to maybe learn to be merciful with myself as much as with other people. But I cannot hold another person to my standards. They have to hold themselves to their standards. And where I'll come back to the idea of judging, what is important is that we will be called upon from time to time to fraternally or even paternally, in the case of a bishop or a pope, to correct our brothers and sisters. And we know this from family. You don't stop loving a child simply because you have to punish it, correct its behaviour. It is out of love that a parent corrects a child. Not out. A parent who fails to correct a child is not actually being a good parent to that child. At the same time, a parent has to give a child freedom to develop and understand the world from with its own insights and understanding. Because you're not going to be there to look over your child at every point in their life, and you equip them as best you can with an understanding of what is right and good and proper, and then hope and pray that they implement that understanding in every circumstance in their life, because you want what is best for that child. And if a human parent loves a child to that extent, surely a divine parent, who is the definition of love itself, will have an even greater approach. And so what the Pope is actually advocating in Amoris Laetitia about irregular marital unions, where a couple continue to live as a couple, even though in an objective way that state of affairs would be considered sinful, because subjectively they believe it to be the best way for them to be living their lives with all the circumstances, for example, familial duty to each other and to any children of the second union, and their relationships with other parts of their family, and so on and so forth. All the different things that everybody has to take into account all the time in their human relationships. The Holy Father is exhorting us to stress the love of God through his mercy, rather than through any sense, well, I've done the right thing and therefore I deserve my reward. Because that isn't the revelation of Jesus Christ in the gospel. That isn't the good news that the apostles take to the world. The good news the apostles take to the world is that God loves us no matter what. And then the onus becomes on us to express that love as well as we can to ourselves and to each other, and so to God. And the second part of this is a Conservative MP, William Rees-Mogg, who is a Catholic, and in many ways is a caricature of himself, of the archetypal Odetonian aristocratic Conservative Party. But he was interviewed on television a couple of weeks ago, and actually about a month ago now, and stated his personal opposition to abortion under any circumstances. But how he wasn't going to use his personal opposition to make political points. And this is a very difficult aspect for those who follow any religious faith in a pluralist society, because the duty upon any individual is to protect the weakest and most vulnerable in our society. And in many cases now, that will necessarily be the unborn, who are threatened with deliberate termination of pregnancy. But at the same time, the absolute good of protecting the young doesn't outweigh the absolute good of protecting the woman involved in this pregnancy, the particular circumstances that this woman faces, the particular support that they need, the reasons why they might make a decision. And to simply bring condemnation on a person because of a decision that I would not like to have to be in a position to have to make, particularly if that then leads to the removal of medical help and assistance with pregnancy because of the risk of a termination, whether it is deliberate or whether it is simply biological, that this is how the body has reacted to this particular pregnancy for whatever reason. to criminalize women in those circumstances seems to me to be against common sense, against decency, against love and mercy. And even to criminalize doctors and nurses who participate in these activities seems to me as well to be removing yourself from the particular circumstance of an individual decision. And this all sounds like a cop-out. I worry to myself that I am not standing up for something that I believe in. But I have to recognize that people are in a variety of different states in their life, are facing a variety of circumstances. And there may well be some people who are simply evil. But I don't believe that is true of most people, most of the time, all of the time even. I've known one person in the whole of my life that I might consider to have been evil in their intent, because it was merely destructive intention. There was no, as far as I could see, no mitigating factor. But I've known a lot of people who have done objectively wrong things, sinful things. I myself, this isn't a confession, I myself am not clean in that respect. And I think one of the dangers that people of all religions face in a pluralist society is not becoming irrelevant, which is true to form. There is a liberal Catholic periodical in the UK called The Tablet, and true to form, it has diminished this moral hazard to simply, well, if we don't adapt our beliefs, then we become irrelevant to the society around us, and that isn't the case. And it's trivializing, and it's I find that approach to be dishonest and to be disrespectful to the sincere beliefs of other people, and people on the right hand side of the argument deserve as much respect as people on the left hand side of the argument. And the best way to find a resolution is dialogue, is always dialogue. So the reality I have discovered through my pastoral work and through my experience of living alongside people in a variety of states of objective sin, if you like. And I know that that sounds terribly judgmental and terribly negative, but I think I'm using theological language, and there is no judgment of the intention or the integrity of the individuals involved. It's merely a statement that in absolute moral terms, one thing is right and one thing isn't, but that the people doing it are not necessarily bad people. As I've said throughout this, there are reasons why people make the decisions they make and are ensnared in the situations in which they're ensnared. And it's not for me to judge the individual, because that's God's role, not my role. But it is for me to judge for myself whether the person is in the right condition for fraternal correction, or whether simply being supportive, both in person and in prayer, and by being a fellow traveller along the road that they have to take, is the best way to support and guide and help. So I hope that for those of you who have been interested in this, I realise that this is quite a serious statement I'm making, but I hope you can understand that in order to be relevant to the world in which we live, we can't simply fall back on black and white, yes and no, this and that answers. We have to accept that human beings are complex creatures, and therefore the situations in which they find themselves will of necessity be complex. And if we wish, as a Christian, if I wish to reflect the love of God to my fellow man and woman, then that love, as far as Pope Francis is exhorting us to show, that love has to be mercy rather than condemnation, supporting people in the situation in which they are, knowing that I myself am no more perfect than any other person I meet, and having a truly humble expectation and understanding that God will decide, and I'm no more worthy of forgiveness than any other person, but God forgives. I hope, therefore, that tomorrow I will resume normal podcasting on a brighter and more interesting, perhaps for many, note. And thank you for sticking with me through to the end. I will be more than happy to answer any questions that people have. I would like to say that I am not an authorized teacher or preacher. Every thought and word that I've expressed in this podcast is my own. It isn't in any way a reflection necessarily of official Catholic teaching, but I think I've gone some way perhaps to explaining some of the underlying principles that the Church wishes to present to the modern world. So until tomorrow, I will say goodbye, and thank you for watching, and I'll speak with you again tomorrow. Bye bye.